Welcome, everybody. I originally had planned a few more items besides the topic that is presented here in front of you, but I got a call from Reese about a week ago, and he has some very exciting things to share with us. So I thought, okay, I'll stick to my main title here and make sure that we cover that really well. And then I'll turn it over to Reese to tell us some new and exciting things that he wants to share about action flow and some inventory stuff. So I'm not able to connect. So I'm on my phone here, and I'm going to ask Josiah to flip the slides for me. So let's go ahead and look at our next slide here, and we kind of review the topics we're going to cover. And this presentation will be shared with you in the link, I'm sure, over the next few days here, so you can review this as well. So we're going to talk about the inventory status life cycle. And you'll see in a moment why that's so critical and important to make sure that we are coinciding with the way the job statuses are configured. We want to be able to look at our inventory history to see what's happened with individual serial numbers. We're going to talk about illogical actions, why certain things have to be done in a certain order, and if they're done in the reverse order, so to speak, then the system's going to help us and tell us that, hey, we're doing something that doesn't make sense here. We're going to spend quite a bit of time on the status of inventory relevant to a used status versus installed. And finally, we're going to look at some reports, and we're going to spend a few moments on the definition of WIP, work in progress, versus finished goods, and how Action Flow can help you with that information. So let's go to our first cell here called inventory purchase orders. This is kind of where things all start. Everything here is responsible for the creation of our inventory. So the purchase order creates the SKUs, the serial numbers, we order it, receive it, or we partially receive it. Basically, as we're doing this, we're in the infancy stage of the actual SKU and serial numbers. The inventory item is, when it's added, we get the status of created. So that happens when you first open your purchase order and you initially add your first SKU and your color name. It gets a serial number, so the status at that point becomes created. When the purchase order is ordered, so if you're doing it through the actions, it'll automatically change the status to ordered, and so will the individual lines in that purchase order. When the purchase order is finally received or partially received, depending upon all or some of your items there, the status will change to available. So that's kind of the evolution. So the purchase order has a status, and the individual line items themselves kind of play along and match along with those statuses. Just a point here, if you create a purchase order, say with 10 lines on it, and you submit that purchase order, and you've gone through the actions and the purchase order status is now ordered, and you realize maybe you forgot 2 items and you're going to quickly add them, and you're going to let your vendor know that you need to add 2 more, don't forget to manually change those lines themselves to the same status as the other 10. So this is where you would interject and you would manually change those extra 2 to match the status of ordered. Let's go to the next cell here, and we'll talk a little bit more about why these statuses are so important and what do they ultimately do for us. On the back side of the system on a daily basis, somewhere through the night, I don't know the exact time, but somewhere through the night, the system will take what we call a snapshot. So think of that as being a picture. In essence, we're creating a record of every serial number that's in the database, and it takes a picture of its current status and all the information related to that based upon the date it was received, the date that it's been managed, the date that maybe you used it, or the date it was installed. And all these things are happening, and they're stored in a data table that later on we can retrieve and say, hey, what was going on with our inventory on December 30th or 31st at the end of last year? So it allows us to roll back in time, hence the name snapshot. And it's real important with these snapshots that the data is accurate. And you'll see in a moment what things we need to be mindful of to make sure that data is accurate. So the next cell is probably the most important one in the presentation. It's an understanding or realization of what I call the life cycle. And I came up with this concept way back in the beginning of using Action Flow when trying to understand how this all comes together. So I call phase one, I'll call it the birth. It's the creation. It's when the inventory status is created and ordered. Phase two is now the inventory is alive and well and kicking. And that's when the status is received, available, consigned, if you have consignment inventory, and pending return, because pending return is still kind of in a live kicking state, and we can still make the change to that particular item if we don't want to return it, and it's now back in the status of available. The third phase is probably the most important one to understand here. This one is what I call WIP, work in progress, or rest in peace. Rest in peace is basically the same thing as now we've got a tombstone on top of the inventory item, and it's no longer alive, it's no longer in use. So the statuses for this would be used as WIP, installed as rest in peace, discarded as rest in peace, same with lost and returned. Notice there's a big orange arrow that goes from the left all the way to the right, meaning it's a one-way street. And you'll see in a moment, if we choose to change directions, it's going to cause some problems. Well, Action Flow's got some pretty clever logic on the backside that says, hey, if you step backwards, we're going to mess up your snapshot report. And in doing that, you're going to have incorrect data if you were to go back in time and review what that information looked like at that time. So it's really important to appreciate from left to right what the phases are. So I call them phase one, phase two, and phase three. So this is important to have in reference as you review this presentation. Okay, let's take a look at what we call the job target date. Now we're talking about what's going on at the job level as it interacts with the inventories. So once an inventory is tagged to a job, then we're going to interact in our fabrication tab. So in the case of a slab, if we generate a remnant or we're going to consume the full-size slab, either way, you're going to click the Use button. When the Use button is clicked, the system will either ask you if you need a remnant or not. If you do or don't, the system defines a slab inventory and it changes it to a status of used. So if you go back one cell, please, Josiah. So here you can see a status of available has now gone into phase three because now it's used, okay, which stands for work in progress. Okay, we'll go back to the next cell. So this particular moment in time, we call this work in progress, primarily because the used inventory is not yet necessarily been finalized and done. Our CAD department or engineering department or our SAW department, whoever's responsible for clicking use, is simply saying that I have cut this slab. Okay. As we go now to the to sinks, we have the same thing there. So if you're using serialized sinks, then or any non-serialized inventory item like brackets or braces, if they're serialized, same thing. You'll click the Use button, and this defines that inventory item as being a work in progress, same as the slab is. Now, here's the important thing to understand. Once the job is installed and the status of the job changes to installed, or if it's a pickup or delivery, whatever action triggers the job status to change to installed, this will change the inventory status from used to installed. So let's go back one cell again. And now you can see we've gone to installed, which is rest in peace. In other words, the tombstone has been set. And as far as we're concerned, that item has been exited. And that's an important term to remember as well. We've now put a timestamp on that serial number as to when that inventory exited our available status and is now resting in peace. Okay. The next cell after that one called issues that cause misinformation. So once you kind of in your mind understand the relationship between the job status, the inventory status, how the two work together, you'll have a much better appreciation for how this information can get a little bit twisted. So if we're not using the inventory PO actions, if we're managing the inventory actions manually, without understanding what it is you're doing and the implications thereof, if you're adding an inventory item to a job after the status is equally installed, or you're changing the status inventory item from phase 3 to phase 2, remember that's now going back from right to left, which is illogical. That's a problem. But we'll talk about that in a couple of cells here in a minute. And the other thing is, if you're manually setting an inventory item that is not tagged to a job, to a status of used. If you manually set an item to a status of used, it will never, ever automatically get a status of installed. So again, there's times if we're going to do something manually, we would bypass used and we would simply go to installed. That sets the exit date and it puts that item to a status of rest in peace. So if you do any of these actions, or if you do any of these steps sort of out of sequence, or you are not following the procedures as action flow is designed to, you will cause misinformation. Misinformation means if you look at grid view, you look at your snapshot reports, you look at any reports, some of your waste reports, things of that nature, that data will not be in the proper date cycle, or it won't even be in the proper classification as far as status goes. Okay, let's look at inventory checks and balances. And this is something you can do almost right away. And I have been on this path here for some time now with a number of databases to kind of see, hey, what's the status of the inventory? Is it healthy? Are we looking at good information? And if not, let's figure out what's going on here. So here's basically grid view. If you go to grid view and you select the inventory item as your record type, and you look for a status of used, and then click review. And my guess is, from my experience in the last little bit here, is you're going to see some numbers that are pretty high, and they're not reasonable. In other words, you're looking to see, hey, in my shop, I'm expecting about 200 items in my shop to be in this WIP or used state. In other words, between the time that the slab was deemed to be consumed or used versus the time the job was set to a status of installed. So if you're seeing some really high numbers, that's a good indication that you've got some problems with the inventory and the way it's being managed. So what you can do is you can scoot along the row in your grid view, and you can look for your column labeled job. And what you're looking for is to use that filter on the job and look for empty or null. In other words, I have inventory that has been set to a status of used, but it's not associated to a job. Well, that was one of those items I mentioned in a cell prior to this. That creates misinformation. And if there's no job associated to it, there never will be a job action that will change that no job, if you will, to install. So it's always going to be in a status of used, which is not where you want it. So in this case, as I say, if you find any, that would be a good place to start to find out why the inventory is not associated to a job. Many times it's because the inventory is released from the area, but the status is never updated back to available. So let me explain that in another way of understanding. You tag 3 jobs tag 3 slabs to an area. You find out later on that you were able to potentially do the job out of 2 slabs. And the 3rd slab is basically no longer needed. Well, if that slab is simply removed from the area, its status doesn't automatically change back to available. Someone has to manually go to grid view, find that serial number, and manually set it back to a status of available. In other words, If it stays in the status of used, but it's not connected to a job, it will never become a status of rest in peace. So the other column that you can use in conjunction with this is a column called used date. This is the date that gets set when the status of the inventory item gets set to used. So once you've cleaned up the null ones, and you've kind of figured out what those are all about, again, it may take a little bit of investigation to determine if they really are available or what the case is, what the situation is. Now you're going to start tackling going to look at the use date. And my experience, again, I've now been on 3 databases where I've gone and spent some time in cleaning them up, is I find stuff goes back to 2021, 2022, 2023, 2024, and it's like, if this was used 3 years ago, there's a chance it's not here anymore. Or for whatever reason, the job status wasn't changed to installed. So there's a variety of things that you need to kind of check on. So what I've done is I filter on the use date, and I'll find everything that is prior, say, to December 31st, 2022. And you'll get a subset, and you can start working away at those. And remember, as soon as you click and change the status from used to installed, if you go look at the column labeled exited date, you will see it put a timestamp of the moment you change it to installed. So unfortunately, there's going to be some misinformation for a period of time in some of your reports because it really didn't get exited today. It was exited 2-3 years ago or a year ago, but for whatever reason, it never got that installed status as a final setting. So be aware that a lot of these reports are focusing on exited date, and that's the same thing is true with the snapshot report. Let's go to the next cell. Let's talk about the primary reasons why used inventory will never equal status of installed. The job status was never set to installed. That would be the one reason. Inventory is released from a job but never manually updated back to a status available. That was the example I just gave you where you had assigned 3 slabs, consumed 2, and 1 was not needed, so you thought you were returning it back to inventory. And not using the scan sessions correctly. And I'm not going to get into scan sessions. That could be easily another training session that we would have of how to use the scan sessions correctly to reconcile your inventory scans. So where I'm going with this is, let's say, for instance, you cleaned up some inventory, changed it from used to installed. Then you did a scan session and you came back in and you were working your scan session to do your reconciliation. You might find that one of those slabs that you set to a status of installed, which is rest in peace, yard. So therefore, you'll find that the system will prompt you and say, hey, something's going on here. You scanned the slab that you said at one time was no longer available. So let's fix this, and we'll go through that. So hopefully we can do another session on the scan sessions and kind of get some clarity there. Okay, let's look at what we call illogical actions. So are you on that cell, no, Josiah?
Yes.
All right. So illogical action dialogue. Some of you may have already seen it. I've got an example on the next slide here. So let's look at the example first, and then we'll scoot back to this one here. If you trigger a status of an inventory item that the system deems illogical, it's going to pop up this little window. And it's going to ask you, do you want to void the actions highlighted in pink? So if you kind of look at the logic here, it's saying, hang on a second now, it was available, installed. Oh, hang on a second. Now it's going back to available? That doesn't make sense. So the pink ones are basically the ones that it says, hey, these ones shouldn't be here. They really are not needed because it was installed, then it went to available, then it went to used. So how is that possible? How did that logic, ever get set that way? So to clean up your snapshot reports, if you simply find an action, and I'll show you in a moment how you can get to that, if you find an action on a serial number that is illogical, the system can either void it for you, or you can do it manually. So in this case here, if I was to click yes to void the actions, then the status will go back to a status of installed, which is its final resting place. So let's go back one cell, Josiah, please. Okay. So the third point is the one that really drives it home. You have this phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3, birth, life, rest in peace. If any of these statuses are in the incorrect sequence based upon the date, the dialog box will pop up. Don't just ignore the dialog box. Don't treat it like a billboard on the freeway. Take a moment and look at it, because what I would like to suggest here is that in the beginning, as you go through this, you will find a lot of these, and you need to understand why it's happening. Once you see a pattern, then you can deal with it. It's either a department, it's either an individual user, or it's a misunderstanding, maybe it needs a little bit of training. But bottom line is, don't just click these yeses just because the billboard pops up and says, click me. Take a moment and see if you can figure out a pattern, right? So the last point is, rarely is this a system problem. If your job process and the inventory item process is set up correctly, you can work with your account reps on that, then the system knows how to manage the status correctly. Usually it's because a human intervenes and does something which they believe is correct, and inadvertently they cause this illogical sequence on the backside. So if you make changes in grid view to the statuses, or you make them on the inventory PO, in either scenario, it'll pop up this dialog box that I just showed you. So let's take a look at the dialog box one more time.
Hey, Roderick, I'm going to jump in here real quick. You're doing a great job. This is great. And I want to make one point that may not be clear. Like when you're if you're manually trying to adjust this, and let's say you go to an inventory item and you manually set it to installed, it will automatically come down and you can see these set statuses on your screen right here. Like if it will create a set status with, like in this example, install, and it will put today's date on that when you do that. Or you could accomplish the same thing by coming down and creating a new set status action, set the decision to install, and clicking done, and it will create that. Now, the one point I wanted to make, which is fairly technical, but it could be significant. If I wanted to say, oh, this actually was installed back in January, I can create a set status, set the decision, and I can, rather than clicking done on the action and setting it to today, I can go into this completed column right here and manually type in one, like if I wanted to set it to January 31st, I could type 1/31/2024. Rather than clicking done, I actually put in the completed date myself to the date I want it to happen. And so you can actually retroactively set statuses to an earlier date by manually entering something into that completed field. Does that make sense?
Perfect. Super.
All right. Yeah, sorry, but yeah, go ahead. Like I said, this is really good stuff.
In the last 3 databases, I cleaned up in excess in one database of 3,200 used items. I don't know if I would have had the time or patience to set the date to where it should have been, but I understand what you're saying, so that's good.
Yeah, I mean, maybe you just do it and you realize it'll cycle through in a month or two and those dates won't matter a month from now. But if it is a situation where you really want to make sure that, hey, this slab really got installed in January and I want it to reflect that, you do have that capability.
Sure.
Yeah, that's all.
Sure.
All right, thanks.
So that's fine. So what I'm going to add to that then is you may have to do some bulk work. And that's what I was suggesting a moment ago when I cleaned up, over 3,000 records. And I worked with a client on it. It took us a day and a half because you have to do them each one by hand individually. And it was a team of 3 of us. And so what happened was we basically said, okay, we're going to clean up until the end of March. And we're going to leave April alone. And we're going to go and work with our people. And we're going to start training them and showing them the proper process here. And then we checked the next day and we could see things already going off the rails. So at that particular point in time, we actually dug into some serial numbers and found who was managing the job and found out who was interacting with those serial numbers. And we were able then to isolate what's going on and start some training process. It's very difficult months later or years later to try and figure out what's happened. So you basically have to just do a bulk cleanup, get yourself in a decent state, maybe within 2 weeks of today's date, and then say, okay, it's a good chance some of these are truly in their proper steps, and these jobs will get installed. And maybe there was an issue with the install and we couldn't set the job to install, it went to partial install. Okay, well, if we get the repair done or remake done or whatever we're doing, eventually that job will get installed, and at that point the inventory will correct itself. So so just again, if you're cleaning up a handful of them, then what Reese is saying makes a lot of sense. But if you're trying to do a bulk cleanup, you may not have the opportunity to spend that kind of time to do that. Okay, let's take a look at the next cell here called Inventory PO Historic Information. The inventory PO has another side to it that most people don't appreciate or don't even realize it can do. If you're trying to find out the history of a serial number, I wouldn't go to change log file or anything like that. I wouldn't work in the grid view section. I go straight into the purchase order. I'm going to ask Josiah to go to the next cell because it's going to explain how to get there and get there quickly. What you're going to do is go to the inventory PO. You don't need to click and open an existing PO. You simply go down to the inventory search. You can kind of see it mid-screen there. And you're going to enter the serial number. So my serial number was 20342. The system will look through all the items and open up the purchase order of that serial number. And to the left there, you'll see that serial number. In this case, it's the Cambria Brookvale High Gloss. And now I want to look at the history. I go down to my actions. I click on the history checkbox. And then I can see the similar information that I showed you a moment ago in the illogical dialog box, but here actually you're seeing the physical dates, statuses, actions, all that kind of good stuff is sitting right here, looking at you and helping you understand who done what. If you scroll to the right in this little lower section, you'll eventually get to a section where you can see potentially who tagged it or who didn't tag it or whatever they did. You can see that in the comment field as well. So this was tagged to job number 6441 on that date, 6/21/23, and then it was set to used. And then you can see, in this case here, this is one of the ones I cleaned up. So this was actually set to a status of used on June 22nd. And you can see that in the process of cleaning this up, and that just happened to be yesterday, I was working on another database, and I used that as my example to build this presentation. And you can see that I set that on yesterday at 2:15 to a status of installed. Okay, let's go back one cell. So this is just going to walk you through the steps that I just showed you in the screen capture there of kind of how you're going to get there. You don't want to click on the word history. In this case, you truly want to click on the history checkbox and just ignore that little message. You're okay with that. And then you'll be able to see the details in there. Okay, let's go on to the cell labeled inventory reports. And again, I'm not going to get into detail on this, but here are the reports that I've quickly identified. And there's more, but these are the ones I've identified that really rely on the inventory status and dates to be accurate. And so grid view is obvious, right? That's your status. So if you're trying to find a slab that's available and you put in status is available, then you expect that to be correct. Inventory snapshot, and this is where it's a big deal that the status and the dates are correct for both incoming, when it was used, when it was exited. All that information will now correctly reflect on that snapshot report. And the snapshot report then behaves very similar then. You got the same information, status and date that's going on the waste report, financial summary. Financial summary looks at exited date as also cost of goods on SKU class. So a lot of these reports are really very helpful, but more helpful if the data is correct and accurate. The also too, just want to make note for those that are doing QuickBooks synchronization, the inventory status of the actual inventory item itself has nothing to do with the data that's going over to QuickBooks. So don't be fearful that this is going to have financial implications by you changing these statuses from the standpoint of messing up QuickBooks. Now, if you have inventory that was in a status, say, for instance, of discarded or lost, well, that might have some impacts because it does actually trigger QuickBooks in a different way. And so therefore, we might have to take a look at that separately. But so these are some of the reports that are really important to look at. And but again, if your statuses are wrong, then don't be surprised if some of these reports don't make sense. They're not going to add up. But if you take the time to do the bulk cleanup and then monitor it and try and identify where it's going sideways on you, I think within a couple of months, you should have some pretty nice data. The last cell simply says, I'm open for questions.
I'll monitor the chat. Or if there's any, you feel free to unmute yourself, and then we'll kick it to Reese. Going once.
The silence means one of two things. Either I did a poor job or I did a decent job, one of the two.
Gotta be the latter.
Anyway, thank you so much for your time. This presentation will be shared with you. And again, if you have any questions, just work with your account reps, and I'm sure they'll help you clean things up.
Thanks, Roger.
Yeah, thank you, Roderick. You know, you brought a tear to my eye as I thought of all those little slab tombstones of those dearly departed slabs who are now resting in peace. I had not. Yeah, I had not. I thought that was actually kind of clever. You got the WIPs and then the RIPs. So that was funny and kind of a nice way to think about it. So yeah, thank you. And just let me just mention too. I think many of you are aware, but you know, Roderick is not an ActionFlow employee. He's a consultant in the industry, but we have a long and close relationship with him, and he implements and administers ActionFlow for I think maybe 10 different large fabricators. And he's been doing it for a long time, and you know, he's like, if he sometimes will use the phrase boots on the ground, like he's the boots on the ground, and like, yeah, to some degree he's kind of like the captain leading the troops out on the battlefield, and he's out there getting bloody and muddy and really diving in and figuring out how to make ActionFlow work. So he, you know, among all the people in the world who understand ActionFlow, he's right there at the top of the list. And you know, yeah, in some ways, probably just because he's working with it every day, might be more familiar with some of this stuff than even I am, because it's been a while on some of this stuff for me. But yeah, he does a good job. And Roderick, I thought that was a good illustration, and yeah, talking about the life cycle and all that. Thank you for doing that, and thank you for your ongoing support of ActionFlow. I'm going to talk a little bit about a couple specific things, and I'm going to get up on my soapbox, and I'm going to take a real brief tangent here. And you know, there's this phrase soapbox. I don't know, maybe how often you hear it, but I thought, you know, I'm interested. What is a soapbox? And a while back, I looked it up, and you know, maybe you all know this, but a soapbox is like, here's this picture. you know, it used to be people would go out, whether on the carnival or on the street, and they'd put a box that had soap and they put it on the ground and they stand on it and they would give their lecture. So I'm going to give a short little lecture here and stand up on my soapbox and bestow my wisdom upon the crowd. So generally, I just want to talk about this kind of dilemma, this process that we go through at Action Flow, where we want to create something valuable for our clients. And yeah, you may be seeing my screen, but I'm not referring to that quite yet. We want to create something valuable for our clients, of course. I think that's obvious. And we want to, we come out with new features, and, we'll do something and we'll roll it out, and maybe one of our clients will try it and, it's not quite right. And so we'll get their feedback and tweak it and improve it. And then, okay, that's a little better. And this process, I have this image in my mind of this upward coil, like imagine a large spring and it's coiling upward. And so we're moving upward and we cycle and we keep coming back around to the same point. But each time we get to that point, I hope we're a little higher than it was before. And you could say, well, hey, Reese, why don't you just figure out the right way to do it and do it right the first time rather than, requiring this iterative process? Well, part of it is a conscious decision where, we have an idea of what clients need, but it's amazing. Like you get into it and we say, well, we never thought about that. We never thought about that. So we definitely consider like new features and Action Flow in general to be an iterative process where we're hearing from our clients about what we need, and then we listen and we modify it, because we don't necessarily want to get, halfway, 100 miles down the pathway and then realize we went in the wrong direction. And so we try to do this incorporated with the client. And, another thing that might happen is we work with a certain client to do something, and then we kind of roll it out more generally, and we realize, well, another client does it differently, or is not quite the same. And, oh, well, now we got to kind of reconfigure this, and we got to make sure it works for the first client, but also works for the second client. And so it really is this iterative process where, we're rolling out these features and they're continually getting better and better as we get feedback and tweak things and find bugs and all that. And I say that because, I think what sometimes happens is like, and, this might be months or years as we're, getting better and better. So like on some of these features, I think there have been clients that have tried something and the feature isn't quite what they want. And, maybe we're still working on it. So they say, oh, that doesn't work, or that's not doing what I want. And so they give up on it and go back to their own processes and just kind of ignore some of the features that we have available. And then, when we do like really get it working and refined and doing pretty well, they don't know about it. We might get an announcement, might give an announcement or maybe not, but, they'll see the announcement, they're busy, they'll just click and not even get to it. So just generally, I want to make a point, in terms of being on a soapbox, just, we are continually improving and we try to communicate that and continue our these things to update our educational process. But if to some degree, it's a software program, but we're up to about 150 clients. It's also Action Flow generally, and our Action Flow people are a receptacle of all the best practices of our clients, and we're gathering and filtering it and honing it. So, make sure you're taking advantage of that and, continually asking and thinking about, are there features there that I could take advantage of? And specifically, Roderick said, hey, we've got something new and exciting, and that's kind of true. I do want to show you something today that I think has gotten to the point where it's a really nice feature. Now, it's kind of been something that's been evolving, I would say, over the years as we're trying, and it has to do with inventory and how to do this. And so, if we might have shown it to you or you were looking at it a year or two ago, it's probably it wasn't as good as it is right now. So I'm going to show you a few things on a fairly specific note that may be valuable and maybe something you can start taking advantage of. So having said that, I'm going to go to a customer I created called Inventory Example. That's not a very interesting name, but I couldn't think of anything better. And so this is the point in the process. So this is just a simple, I created a simple quote. I said it's silestone, alpina white, inventory. I said we're going to need 2 slabs. And so it's a quote. And I actually previously, well, you can see it this way. Actually, a lot of times I like to see it this way. It's the same information, but I went through a few steps just to get us to a certain point. And the reason I'm jumping in here, because this point in the process is sort of like the bottleneck, or I don't know but like basically every job out there has to come to this point in the process. And in this I'm in our demo database. I'm calling it the confirm inventory. You could call this action whatever you want, but regardless of what you might call it, or even whether you've got this configured in action flow, at some point for every single job, you have to make the decision of, do I have slabs for this job or not? I mean, that's just an obvious thing. And yeah, so you're going to have to make this decision. And, our recommendation is somebody, an inventory manager or project manager at some point, and typically I think it's after template, you just need to review whether you have slabs for this. We're going to have to fabricate and cut this in a few days. We need to make sure we have slabs for it. So it's an obvious question. Everybody has to answer that question. And so, through the years, we've been trying to say, well, how can we answer that question for our clients, and how can we make that easier? And there's basically 2 possibilities on how this is going to be answered. One of them is a situation, again, this is inventory example, but this might be Mrs. Smith or Mrs. Jones, where, they came in, the client came in either to your place or to a distributor, looked at a bunch of slabs and saw 2 or 3 slabs they like, and said, man, I want those 2 slabs. I mean, those are the exact slabs that you need to use because they saw them and they like them. And so, we use the term tagging. There are a few different places you can do that, but in action flow, like here's where I said I need 2 slabs for this. I could say it's not just I need 2 slabs, but Mrs. Smith looked at 385 and 386, and these are the 2 slabs that she wants for this job. So we've tagged those slabs and we're assigning those to these jobs. Now, so you have that capability. Now, one thing that we've sort of realized through the years is that clients are using this tagging capability in another slightly different situation. That is to say, yeah, she doesn't need those exact slabs, but we do want to tell action flow that we need 2 of those slabs. We need 2 of some slabs, and we need to know, we want to know so that we won't assign those slabs and others, and we want to know how many slabs are being used. So one solution clients have come up with, and this is, I specifically picked silestone, a quartz color, because generally, with a quartz color, it's pretty rare that you would pick a particular slab. You just say, here's the color, and we want the next available ones. The problem, if you are tagging slabs for situations where you really don't care if it's that particular slab or not. So again, these 2 scenarios it has to be those 2 slabs, and then there's everything else. Our current recommended best practice is you do not tag slabs unless it really was hand selected and it really is those slabs. And this question of, well, yeah, but how do I know how many slabs are coming down and how many I need? That's the thing that I say recently, over the past year or so, I think we've come up with a pretty good solution. Because, well, one problem, there's a couple different problems with tagging a slab that you don't need, or that's not really assigned to that job is, it's been described to me like, you might have an A-frame with, 10 different slabs of, let's say, Alpino white, a quartz color, and you don't really care which slabs you use, but you tag these 2 slabs and they're like five slabs deep. So you go to grab the slabs for this job, you got to move the slabs in front and grab the 2 that you need. So it's actually quite a bit of effort just to get those 2 slabs when it didn't really matter to begin with. But so that's one, like, physical problem of extra effort. But just generally, if you're tagging slabs, and when you don't really need it, those particular slabs, there's maintenance and you got to untag them if you don't use them and all that. So there's some effort. So, we do have this idea, this next available. So if you came to this point in the process, and typically with a quartz, you would say, well, let's just use the next available. So when it comes time to grab slabs for this job, let's just grab the next 2 that are on the rack. So let's not tag them up front. Let's just grab the next 2. But then the question is, well, yeah, but how do I know how many slabs I need if I don't know what's out there? And here, I mean, this is kind of the whole point I've been getting to, is this report. Well, there's a couple different ones, but usable inventory items by job. So this has been refined through the years, and I think at this point it's working very well if you do a couple steps to make it work. So this could show up a couple different places, just a couple different menu items, but there's 3 key sections to this report. Notice it automatically looks for the colors you're dealing with. So when it says by job, it says if thy colors on this job. In this example, I only have 1 kitchen, but if I had 4 bathrooms, there might be 4 pages to this report, 1 for each color. The first section is the items needed for this area. So this first section is looking, you can see it in here, you can see the same information over here on the fabrication tab. Says we have 2 silestone slabs we need for this area. One other thing I'll show you, this is also a place where you may want to start using this use percentage. You can either manually type in a decimal there, or you can say, well, I just need 60 by 55, and it will calculate a use percentage. But down here in these 2 fields, you can say, how much of this slab do I expect to use? And getting a little bit off, but there's even the ability to do, the fabrication layout where it's going to show your slabs and you can do your seams and all and lay it out. So, but the idea is you can tell in this grid down here how many slabs you need. So right now I just changed that to 1.5. And if you see, if I rerun this report, it should now say that I need 1.5 slabs for this job. Right there. And then it's also going to calculate the square footage you need. Okay, so that's the first set of information. The second set of information is, what do we have in inventory? And so this is really the powerful piece of this, is that action flow. No, actually, well, this is powerful, but the next one is the one I meant that was really powerful. But this is just looking at all your slabs. Basically, it's going to look at what it's available and what's been ordered. It should show ordered ones is here, so you know what's coming. And if they were tagged for other jobs, it will show that. So, it might show, hey, you got these available slabs, but they're tagged for another job. So they're probably not really available for this job. And you can say, what's your non-remnants total? And then right here, this is a really important number. It says, how many untagged non-remnant slabs do we have out there? So this is saying we have 12. Okay, so we need 2, we've got 12. That says we're looking in pretty good shape for this color, this Alpino white. But there's one other key bit of information. What if there are other jobs out there that are in process that are going to use Alpino white, but because, you know, we're not tagging those, they're not tagged, they're not used yet. So, you know, if we got bombarded with a bunch of slabs at the same time, we might not have enough. So this down here that says items needed for other areas that are not yet tagged. So here it's looking at throughout all of action flow. And again, this is what I would say is a pretty powerful piece. And looking at all the slabs out there and that have all the jobs out there that are going to be using slabs. And again, it's going to kind of similar up here. It's going to look at the count, the use percentage, the square foot, and it's going to tell you, like, based upon jobs have been accepted and templated. So these are real jobs. They're going to happen. And if there's a template and install date, it'll show that down here. And it says we're going to need 4 slabs. So by looking at this one report, you can see, well, I need 2 for this. I have 12, but 4 of those are going to be needed. So, hey, I think I have 8. So bottom line, I don't think I have to order any slabs for this job, and I can just move on. So in that case, you know, rather than going through the order process, I would probably say, hey, I think we're pretty good. Just use the next available slabs when you get ready to do it. Alternatively, and I think, you know, there's a way where you can use this to trigger an order, a purchase order and all that. But I wanted to highlight that. There's another report that's similar. If I go to the inventory, and it's called this inventory alerts. So I'm going to run this. I'm going to run this for Silestone. Let's see what this says. Doesn't come up. I did this intentionally, which is to say, I ran it in a way that it didn't produce anything. You know, partly like, you know, this may be fairly common and kind of referring to what I talk about, you know, working through these problems. Like you got 5 people calling you and you've got lots going on. You say, well, maybe I'll look at that report. You pull it up. It doesn't work. This doesn't work. Stupid report. And then you give up on it. I mean, that's just very common. Like it takes effort to learn new stuff. So like, I just kind of want to illustrate this, that, you know, it could be that maybe there's just a configuration piece before a report like this makes sense. And in this case, there is. So I'm going to come to administration. I'm going to come to Silestone, Alpina White. You know, a lot of these colors you don't care about, but there will be some colors that are in your stock program or whatever, and you're going to want to know when these are getting low. So we have this column, you know, it's like a few columns over. It's called alert quantity. So here I'm going to say, like, you know, depending on how long it takes you to get more of these slabs, I want to be notified when I get down to 10 slabs. I want an alert at that point on Alpina White. So now when I put that in, not only does it give me alert, but that says I include this on my inventory alerts report. So if I come back here again and I run this report, inventory alerts, and I'm going to pick Silestone 3CM. And there it is. So here's Alpina White. It says we have 12 full slabs. If there were some on order, it would even show, well, you've already ordered some and it's going to be delivered here. Here's some remnants, and you could include, so you basically have 12, and that's 550 square feet. Now, how many are required? Well, it's going to show if there were some that are actually tagged out there, it would show that. But here it's showing how many do you need that are not tagged. So that's similar to that third section. You know, this doesn't give you quite as much information as that other report that's focused in on that one color, but it does say you need 5. So if I have 12 and I need 5, that puts me down to 7. My alert is 10, so I'm 3 below the surplus, or I've got 3 less than I need. Like if I had 15 and my alert was 10, then I'd have a surplus of 5 before I need it to order. But here it's saying I'm 3 below my alert number, so I should probably get these ordered. So, you know, that's just a really nice report to give you an overview of the slabs that are in your stock program that you're not necessarily tagging, and allow you to keep an eye on it. So whether you are running this very detailed report on a specific, you know, the very specific slabs, or whether you're wanting the overview report, we've got some pretty nice tools to help you know when it is you need to order slabs and how many you need to order. So that's what I wanted to share. I'll open it up to questions. So once again, as with Roderick, I either was so clear that I answered every question, or I was so unclear that people are just bewildered and don't even know what question to ask. Could be either one of those.